Hey everybody, welcome back. Good afternoon to you guys. This is the first of our live stream meetings in our new online format. Hopefully you guys are having a really good week, that you've had a good spring break, and that you're doing well with all the new stay-at-home guidance that we're all receiving. But you're tuned into the right place. This is the channel that we're going to watch these lectures in and that we're going to interact. It's really not much different, except for the fact that you're going to get these lectures from your comfort of your own home, using whatever devices you're viewing me on, and instead of going to our typical classroom face-to-face meetings. So welcome here. I'm just here a few minutes earlier than 12:45 for those that arrive to the live stream before others, to give you a little margin of error. But we will get started with the lecture for today's material at 12:45 sharp. So in the meantime, welcome back, and I'm really glad to see you guys here today. So we got an important lecture on Chapter 5 today. Welcome everybody. How am I doing? Hi Andy. Yeah, how am I doing? I'm doing well. My own life hasn't changed too much. I'm still, holding all the same classes. I mean, I'm lucky that I work in an essential field, the university and teaching. So nothing's really changed except I'm just lecturing from home using the live stream webcam. But I don't know. I'm healthy. I'm happy. I'm feeling well. So for now, anyway, everything's good. I don't know anybody who's been really seriously affected by the COVID yet. I had one academic friend who's a professor that actually did get a positive test, but he seems like he's recovering pretty well. So other than that, yeah, it seems like things are in decent shape for now, but knock on wood. Yep, hopefully you guys are doing well too, and coping with our new normal. Yeah, I live in Long Beach. There's still a lot of supplies and things at the local grocers and stuff, so I'm fully stocked with paper products and everything else a person can need. So yeah, not to worry about me. I'm the last thing anyone should be concerned with. I'm doing great like always, but we worry about the most vulnerable out there. Just got to hope for the best, but I think that we'll see the curve go down over time. How come I'm not using Zoom? I know there's lots of different reasons. First of all, I'm familiar with YouTube, and I think it's a little better because I kind of do not like the idea of all the students having their own cameras that they can interrupt the meeting with, or to have their microphones on, and there's all this kind of sound pollution and noise. I feel like a lot of people already use YouTube. This age group is probably more familiar with it. I don't use Zoom. I've never used Zoom. I've used Skype, Instagram stories, Facebook Live, but to the maximum extent possible. I don't want to learn Zoom. I don't know. It's too academic. It's not widespread enough with young people. Plus, here's the other thing. They're not archived. The lectures don't remain up online. With this YouTube format, not only are you guys interacting with me now in live, real time, but this lecture is going to be posted permanently. So you can always go back and just view it again when you're studying, when you're preparing your review for quizzes, exams, and other assignments. So I think that that's a virtue of the system, the fact that it's got a permanent record associated with it. Years later, maybe you're going to have kids, grandkids, maybe you just want to reminisce on your college days. Come back to my YouTube channel and you'd be like, hey, just like I remember him way back then. He's teaching philosophy to me now, and it's been 20 years. So, I like all that stuff. Those are reasons that I did it. I'm hoping that this is a temporary system, so as long as it's not permanent, I don't want to have to learn a whole new set of tools. This is just spring 2020, so I'm thinking in the fall, we'll be back to face-to-face meetings. But if we're not, I'm still going to do YouTube because, no, I don't want to learn Zoom. That's just me. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that or disagree with that? I don't know, how is Zoom working for you in your other classes? Maybe it's going well, maybe it's not. I can't speak to it because I'm not using it. I've heard some students tell me in other classes where I'm holding these live stream meetings that they prefer the YouTube format. I I've had a lot of positive feedback. So I think that it's working out so far pretty well for everybody. So anyways, that would be my reasons. But good to see you guys. We've got a small contingent, but as I've noticed, usually you're saying they had mute off camera buttons. I see what you're saying. Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. Everyone's got their own views about this stuff. You know, for me, having a bunch of student faces pop in and even having the ability for the microphone to be turned on or the camera to be turned on, I don't want any of that. I don't want to be distracted by anything except what I'm doing. So it's just a little bit more top down, but we still have the interaction through the live stream comments, as you can see, because we're interacting right now. You know, people can hack into your Zoom. People can, like Zoom bombing and stuff you've been hearing about. People, you know, get in there and start trying to, you know, hijack your lecture and put weird stuff in there that no one should ever be seeing or hearing online. So, so this eliminates the possibility of that. Plus, I have more control over the content. I can block subscribers so that they can't comment if I don't like what they're doing. So yeah, I like those things. Hello, Andrew. Hey, how are you? Good to see you, different people here. See a couple in a moment. Once we get right up to 12:45, we'll begin our lecture for real. But I hope you guys are comfortable, doing well, staying healthy, and all the rest. Welcome back. Scores back, you can inquire for them starting up on Tuesday. I'll be finishing them over the weekend. And I was going to tell you guys that I'm going to modify, of course, the due date to homework 2. Everything's pushed back by 1 meeting because of the fact that there was a suspension of classes prior to the week of spring break. That's why the midterm was bumped to this week. But because of that, and since we had to accommodate that change, I'm going to modify the due date for homework 2 from next Tuesday till next Thursday. So it's going to be April 9th. And that's a minor change that I'll notify you of today, but also on Canvas in a message that'll follow after the lecture later this afternoon. It's not too bad. It's just a homework assignment number 2. And it's all about the new topics that we're starting to learn in the next few meetings. We're starting chapter 5 now. And we'll have a couple of lectures devoted to this topic of fallacies, which is what chapter 5 is all about. So yes. And so yeah, like at any point in time, people can and should feel free to just chime in with your questions, comments, anything else under the sun. I want this to be as interactive as it can be, so you know, you benefit a lot more from than just check into our lectures. I look at it as, you know, our schedule hasn't changed. We still should attend the meetings from 11:10 to 12:45. If anything, attendance should be easier now, right? Because you don't have to go anywhere. Just turn on your devices. If you're using you know, whatever device to watch me, obviously I think the ideal would be working with a laptop or desktop, so you have a bit more real estate on the screen there to view the written notes. Just as in real class meetings, I'm going to utilize the whiteboard and write definitions, concepts, and examples on it. So you can follow along the lecture, taking your typical notes, asking your typical questions, and we're not making any major changes to anything. We're not changing the schedule or the assignments at all. We're just going to continue going through on our mission to finish this class. So hi, Miguel. Hi, Andrew. So it's 12:45. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Philosophy A150. This is Thursday, April the 2nd. This is our 12:45 to 2:10 p.m. crew, Orange Coast College. Miss you guys, but it's good to see you, and I'm glad that you're all doing well. I would love to see if a couple people would be willing to just throw out a quick greetings, so I kind of get a sense of all the usernames and folks in attendance right now. So just hit me with a quick hello or whatever you can, and I'll just say hi to some of you guys here, and then we'll get right started here on chapter 5. So I see Hilario, Dominic, Wesley, hey there, Andrew, Andy, Donna, how's everyone doing? Who else is in the house? I know we got some more. Sarah, thank you, good to see you there. A few others, what's good? It's like, we got a good amount so far, around 18. I've noticed that attendance has been pretty stable as we've moved into these online meetings. And I'm already doing this at a few other institutions, so I've had some practice by now. You guys aren't the first, so that's probably to everybody's benefit. Well, welcome back, as I've said. So thanks, everyone, for being here. Appreciate it. And quick announcement, I'm going to be done grading your midterms this weekend. I'll send an announcement through Canvas when I'm done with all of them. And then afterward, no later than Tuesday, hey Nicholas, hey James, Blake, and others. Anyway, I'll send that announcement via Canvas, and at that point you can just quickly inquire for your grade, and if you want to see the written comments, Robert, Kyle, great to see everybody, then you can do that on Tuesday. And today then, anyway, we're venturing into a new chapter of our course and a new chapter in our book. So this is all about chapter 5. And the topic of chapter 5 is what are called fallacies, okay? Fallacies. So what are fallacies? Our class is all about argument and argumentation, and not all arguments are equal. Some arguments are better than others. Some arguments have serious problems, and when they have these logical errors and flaws, that's when we say the argument has a fallacy or it is fallacious. So right type of support to the conclusion. So just as a first general, stage setting definition, let's make sure we know what fallacies are. Fallacy: when an argument contains a logical error or flaw, which causes the premises to not provide proper support to the conclusion. So those are what fallacies are. They're logically flawed, erroneous arguments. And they happen when an argument contains such an error or flaw. In such a case, because of that logical error or flaw, the premises of the argument do not provide adequate or proper support to the conclusion. So we want to know what these fallacies are. We want to be able to identify them. Over the generations, over the millennia, different specific fallacies have been named and identified. And the reason we want to kind of have a clear understanding of them is because only then can we do our best to prevent ourselves from committing such fallacies. Hey, Cynthia. Only by knowing what a fallacy is and what its definition is will we be able to stop ourselves from committing fallacious arguments. And also, importantly, when we know what fallacies are, we are able to identify them in the arguments and statements that other people make, and then hold them accountable. If a person makes a bad fallacious argument, if you spot a fallacy in the way someone has presented a case for something, then you can simply refer to the fallacy and say, I'm sorry, but your argument is invalid. You have committed the fallacy of, and then fill in the blank. So we want to not make fallacious arguments, and we don't want to be misled, deceived, or manipulated by other people's arguments which contain fallacies. But knowing is half the battle. Only when you know what they are can you counteract them, identify them, and mitigate their harmful impact on you and other people. So we're learning about fallacies then. That's the topic of chapter 5. We're going to have 3 lecture meetings that go over the different fallacies. So there's 3 categories or groups of fallacies that we're all going to learn. Today the topic is what are called fallacies of ambiguity. And then Tuesday's meeting is devoted to another category, which are called fallacies of relevance. And then Thursday's meeting next week is the 3rd category, called fallacies of unwarranted assumption. So between these 3 batches, fallacies of ambiguity today, relevance Tuesday, and unwarranted assumption next Thursday, that'll comprehensively cover all the fallacies that we want to understand. And the homework that I'll talk to you guys about a little later in the meeting, that has to do with the fallacies of relevance that we will learn on Tuesday. Okay, so we're starting this journey into the realm of fallacious arguments, so we know how not to commit these types of erroneous arguments and how to also, insist and require on other people having high standards of logical argumentation and not trying to manipulate or mislead us with fallacies. Okay, so that's what a fallacy is. Now, when the chapter opens up, they give us a little example, as I think we've seen in a few of the other chapters, where they give like a kind of real world example of the importance of the topics discussed within that chapter. So like in chapter 1, they started off with these social psychology experiments, Milgram and Zimbardo. In the chapter on knowledge, they talked about how medical error has sometimes happened, resulting in people getting limbs amputated that were not supposed to be amputated because they made, they jumped to the wrong conclusions based on insufficient evidence. Okay, well, here in chapter 5, the editor gives us some interesting example of a real life scenario that happened to give us a sense of the value and the importance of not being tricked by fallacies. So they mentioned the example of this woman named Shannon Townsend. Okay, so Shannon Townsend was a really high-performing high school student academically. So she was really an honor student, and then she got accepted to the University of Colorado for college. And when she started her college studies there, she was doing really well at first. Her first semester, she had a 3.9 GPA. So it looks like she's doing well and she's making great progress to all of her goals in life. The example is real, yeah, the case of Shannon Townsend. So what happened, though, towards the end of her freshman year, she got mixed up in this dangerous mind control kind of cult movement called the Brethren. And the Brethren is led by this charismatic cult leader figure named Jim Roberts. And basically, since she joined with this group, she's never been heard again from her friends and family. She completely cut off all social contact with those groups and with her school and employer and everything else. So she's just been sucked in and recruited to this cult, never to be heard from again. Now, you may hear about that case and think, well, that's pretty much an isolated example. But, in fact, as it says in the text, these cults are not new and they're not necessarily exclusive to only one or a few people. Hundreds, in fact, of young, impressionable, college-age type of individuals will be recruited into similar organizations each year. And why is it that people around, for the most part, college-age, younger people are sometimes vulnerable or susceptible to recruitment efforts from cults? Well, there are important reasons for that. They prey on young people because at the age where you're a young adult, you're struggling with a new degree of independence that you never had before in childhood. And you're also trying to form an identity in this world for yourself. Sometimes when you're not yet well experienced, you depend too much on others. You don't have the tolerance for critical thinking. In those cases, you may be the easy prey of these cult movements that promise you an identity, membership in a community, and that also use fallacious arguments in order to intellectually win your assent, win your approval. So what then could be the antidote to being the easy prey of these cults? Well, there's a quote mentioned here from clinical counselor and cult specialist Ronald Burks. And he says this: the antidote is critical thinking, because cults don't like people that are constantly thinking and asking questions. So the hardest type of individual for a cult to recruit is a critical thinking. So if you're a critical thinker, constantly asking questions, demanding high standards of evidence and argument, then it's not so easy for that type of person to be swayed or misled by fallacious reasoning tactics and an argument. So critical thinking, along with all the other skills that it helps provide, also provides us with the intellectual tools that we need to distinguish good arguments from bad, and to be able to tell when a credible case for something is being made versus when something fallacious is being stated. So that's kind of, I guess, an example that leads into chapter 5 that wants to highlight the larger human and social significance of being a skilled reasoner that distinguishes good from bad arguments and knows when there's a fallacy. All right, so as I've said, there are 3 categories of fallacies that we're all going to try and be very clear about. The first one is what are called fallacies of ambiguity. So that's the category for today's meeting, fallacies of ambiguity. So I'm going to erase this generic definition of fallacy itself overall, and then let's understand what are fallacies of ambiguity. Okay, so this grouping of fallacies happens when the problem with the argument is that it's ambiguous in some sense. So the problem here is that the argument contains ambiguous words sloppy grammar, or a confusion between two similar concepts. Okay, so arguments that contain ambiguous words, sloppy grammar, or a confusion between two similar concepts. So that is the fallacy of ambiguity. That's what fallacies of ambiguity are all about. They're grouped by this generic definition. The problem that they have is the inclusion of ambiguous words, or sloppy grammar, or confusion between two similar concepts. So when an argument contains one of those types of logical errors or flaws, that's when it's in this domain of fallacy of ambiguity. Now, there are 5 members of the fallacy of ambiguity clan, if you will. So I'm trying to take it slow and walk you through these definitions step by step. The first thing I showed you there was what the definition of a fallacy is overall. Now I'm talking to you about what the definition of this category of fallacies are, the fallacies of ambiguity. And now we're going to learn about 5 members that fit within the scope of this category. So the 5 individual fallacies of ambiguity. That's now to be discussed. So with this definition in place, I'm going to erase and just list the names of the 5 fallacies of ambiguity that we are going to go over in detail today. All right? So here are the 5. So here are the 5 fallacies of ambiguity listed. First of all, one of them is called equivocation. There is the fallacy of accent. And then there's 2 more, the fallacy of division. And then finally, the fallacy of composition. So the real goal of today's meeting is to gain a precise, clear understanding of these 5 items, these 5 vocabulary terms. What are these 5 things? There are 5 different fallacies of ambiguity. And so that's the material that we're all responsible for today. We're trying to learn about these 5 itemized fallacies of ambiguity. And so we're going to start at the top with equivocation. I'm going to give you guys the definition, some good examples to understand, and then we will go and proceed to the other 4 below. So I just wanted to list the 5 one time so that you can sort of put that down in your notes, or that you at least understand where we're headed with today's meeting. But to create space, we're going to go through them one by one. So I'm going to start at the top with equivocation. Temporarily, then I'm going to move these off the board, and we'll get to them one by one. Okay, so equivocation fallacy. Okay, so the equivocation fallacy, what is going on with this one? And by the way, as I've said, and just always good to know, chime in anytime. If there's anything that you want me to repeat, a question, a comment, something that wasn't coming out clear, I'll be happy to entertain any and all. So just feel free to type in whenever you need to. All right, equivocation, the first fallacy of ambiguity. Here's what it is. So this is when a key term in an argument has more than one meaning, but that term appears more than once during the argument. So when a key term in an argument appears more than once and with different meanings. Okay. Okay, that's equivocation. Key term appears more than once, but with different meanings at the different places where it occurs. So sometimes there's a problem with an argument that causes it to be fallacious when a certain term in the argument has a multiplicity of meanings and it uses different of those meanings in the course of the argument. So basically it's a problematic argument because the meaning of this important key term switches up midway through the argument. And when that happens, no logical conclusion can be drawn from the premises. So let me give you an example really fast, okay? Consider this written example of equivocation that I'm going to put here on the board. So look at the two premises here. Starting off with the first premise. A bank is a financial institution. Okay. Second premise, Joe is at the bank. So this should be a pretty easy conclusion for you to deduce. If you have these two premises, what will you deduce as the conclusion? A bank is a financial institution. Joe is at the bank. Therefore, what do you say? Let's see who can judge the answer to the conclusion or what the conclusion would be. It's pretty elementary. Bank is a financial institution. Joe's at the bank. And so therefore, good, Dominic, that Joe is there. Therefore, Joe is at a financial institution. Sounds straightforward, right? I mean, it makes sense. So let me put that here. Okay, now, I want us to think for a moment about how this argument could go the way of the equivocation fallacy. So, if you ever look up words in the dictionary, right, you guys will notice that it's not usually the case that there's only one single definition associated with a given word. Usually there is a primary, secondary, and etc. additional definitions that can all be associated with a single term. Like, so for example, if I talk to you about the term square, one primary meaning would be the four-sided polygon square, the geometric figure. But people also talk about the town square, you know, like the center of the town where people congregate. And sometimes people use square in the slang sense to refer to a person that's not hip or whatever, someone that's lame and not cool is like a square. Now, these are not all the same meanings, right? But they all answer to the same part of speech or written symbol, the word square. Now, in this example of an argument, let's think. There's a term that's used more than once that could be associated with different meanings. And I see some of you guys who are really quick to sort of determine where I'm going next. So yes, I think you anticipate my question. What key term could be multiply used in this argument with different meanings? And I think you're suggesting that it's the word bank, correct? So with the word bank, I'm going to erase the definition up here because hopefully you've read it, or if you haven't written it down, you can go back and refer to it in the playback. But let's go over the term bank for just a moment. Okay, so the single term bank. I'm just drawing like little lines to point to the two different interpreted meanings of the single word. Now, one meaning of the word bank is clearly the financial type of bank, you know, a lending institution where you can deposit your funds into your accounts, right? So one meaning of the word bank, let's call it definition one, is financial bank. Now, what is a different non-equivalent meaning of the word bank? Andrew, good one. You say you can bank on the fact that Joe was at the bank. Well, bank on meaning like you can count on it, correct. What other possible meanings are there of bank? I see some others already listed. Riverbank, blood bank. There's the bank shot in basketball. But let's just suppose that where Joe's actually at, in the second premise that's mentioned here, is that he's hanging out at the edge of the river. That's another meaning associated with bank, like the Mississippi River banks. Edge of the river. Now examine the argument. In the first premise, where it says a bank is a financial institution, which meaning is being used there? Is it number one or two? like which definition of bank that you see these lines pointed at. In connection with the first premise, we obviously intend the which kind of bank. I think this one's really easy enough. It's the first, yeah. A bank is a financial institution. Yeah, well, a financial bank is a financial institution. Fair enough. But in the second premise, where it says Joe is at the bank, let us imagine that where he actually is hanging out fishing, right? At the edge of the river over there. Now, if that's the way that bank has been used in premise 1 and 2, the same word has been used with different meanings. So does the conclusion follow any longer that Joe is at a financial institution? No, because we have, as they say, equivocated on the meaning of the word bank as we proceed through the arguments. So that means that this conclusion does not actually logically follow from the given premises. Therefore, it's a fallacy of equivocation. That's just one example. Andrew, you say, what if it was edge of the riverbank? Well, correct. I mean, you mean in premise 1 or 2? I'm not sure what the question is asking, but if what you mean is, in the second premise, we speak of him as being at a bank in the other sense of the term, then we don't draw the conclusion that he's at a financial institution. This would only follow if the word bank was used in a univocal standard sense throughout the argument. So the argument is not actually valid. No, Dominic. The reason it's not valid is that although it appears logically valid at a first glance, a closer inspection of it, provided this assessment of the uses of the word bank in the two premises, does show us that the conclusion doesn't follow. What if the name of the bank was Edge of the River Bank? Very clever, Andrew. Let's just suppose that it was Bank of America. Anyway, so there's one example. Let me go over a few others that are written there in the textbook so you can kind of deepen and reinforce this current understanding. So would we have to say financial bank in the initial premise? Well, that's already implicated. What you'd have to say to avoid equivocation is to make it explicit that what is intended in the second premise is also financial bank, right? Then in that case, we could draw our conclusion. But just one trivial example. Let me give you another, okay? And this is from our book as well. So imagine this discussion going on between two friends, Carl and Juan. And these two people that are friends have different opinions. Thank you, Andy, yes. These two people have different opinions about whether people should be allowed to have physician-assisted suicide in the case of them being terminally ill. So Carl says this. Talking to Juan, Carl says, terminally ill patients have a right to decide how and when they want to die. Okay? Now Juan comes back and he says, no, that is not true. There is no right to euthanasia in the US law. All right? Now, so Carl says, terminally ill patients have a right to decide when they want to die. Juan says, no, they don't. There's no right to that in the US law. It seems like they're having a significant disagreement over this question. But what term could they possibly be using in different ways when they discuss this, which shows that there's a little bit of an equivocation going on? Probably you can guess. Which word involved in their discussion here could be associated with different non-identical meanings? Carl says terminally ill patients have a right to decide when they want to die. Juan says no, they don't have any right to that under the law. Good, okay. That's what I'm pointing out, Wesley, Andrew, and others. The word right. So let's consider the way that this one word could be used differently. So first of all, we have Carl. Carl said, good, Amber, that's correct, yes. The word right is what we're breaking down now and seeing how it could be understood in different ways. So when Carl said terminally ill patients have a right to decide when they want to die, what sense or interpretation of the word right do you think Carl is pointing out? Terminally ill patients have a right to decide whether they want to die or not. Right implies what when Carl says it? What do you think? What would be the way that he's framing the issue of a right, or way he's understanding it or putting the idea forward? He claims terminally ill patients have a right to decide when they want to die. They have a right. Meaning what? The freedom, the choice. Okay, good. And so a few ways of putting that. James, Andy, you say an entitled right, you say the freedom. It's kind of like he's saying they ought to have the moral choice. You understand? Like they should have the freedom of choice. That's a human right. It's a natural right that should be recognized by governments. Okay, so he's speaking of it in a kind of moral sense, a metaphysical, inherent moral sense. That's right, Andrew. So Carl's talking about having a moral right, meaning they should have the freedom to choose, okay? But then Juan says that is not true. There is no right to this in the US law. He must be using the same word right with a different understanding, not to refer to the moral existence of the right, but rather what? What is Juan talking about when he says, no, there is no right to that in US law? What does Mr. Juan think the word right is being used to stand for? A legal right, yeah, like something established under the existing laws that you have legal access to, right? So that would be legal. And so now we see that they've actually equivocated on the key term of rights, so they're talking past one another. When Carl talks about they have the right to do so, he's not speaking about what exists under current law. He's saying in an ideal kind of utopian sense, a society ought to recognize this natural right that does exist in the sort of moral sense. And when he's contradicted by Juan, he's not like talking about the same sense of a right. He's not saying there's no moral right to that. He's saying there's no legally existing right to that. In the same way, in the time of slavery, conversations like this could have happened. One person says, people have a right not to be treated as property and transferred from different owners like they're just objects. And someone else says, no, there's no right to that right now. The slavery is legally available on the books. Or if a person today thinks that like drug laws are invalid because there's a moral right to choose what to do with drugs, someone may say people have a right to, decide whether or not they want to take certain substances. And another person says, no, those substances are illegal, so there's no legal right to that. So moral right versus legal right is being equivocated on in the context of that little dialogue. Another example, okay? Let me just give you a few more while we're on the subject, because these are all good examples from our book. Here's an interesting case. So back about 10 years ago in 2010, at that time, it was the Democrats that were in the majority in the Senate. And so Democratic majority leader was Senator Harry Reid. Now, he had given this quote where he said, if you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife, okay? And so that quote from Harry Reid was picked up by the anchors and broadcasters on the Fox News, evening news show. And they highlighted the statement from Harry Reid saying, this is a horrible thing that Senator Reid has said. He said on the floor of the Senate that, if you're out of work and you're not getting any income, then it's okay to beat up your wife. How could he say such a thing? That if you're unemployed, it becomes okay to beat up your wife. That's a disgusting sentiment. Shame on Harry Reid. Now, the textbook mentions this example because we could see this as another case of equivocation, possibly. So what do you think is the key term that is being understood in different ways between the way Reid spoke and the way that the news commentators critiqued his statement? He says, if you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife. News anchor says, that's horrible. Why would you ever say it's okay to beat your wife if you're unemployed? Now, good, Andy. You're saying may. Right, so it is the term may. Let's think for just a brief moment about the different possible meanings of the word may. All right, so one given meaning of the term may is may in what sense? A person says that you may do something. They could intend it in what sense? So, Andy, you give the case of possibility. I want to hold that for the second time. But first is permission. Good, Dominic. So permission. Okay. Like if you ask in class, may I use the restroom to the professor? You're not asking, is it possible, but am I permitted? Am I allowed to do that? A second possible meaning of the same word, though, doesn't have to do with being permitted or allowed. It just has to do with it being possible. And that's exactly what Andy said. That's correct. Possibility. So if I say, there may be aliens out there in outer space, I'm not saying I'm giving them permission to exist. I'm saying it's a possibility. If I tell you that, if you go outside and you don't wear a mask, you may get sick. I'm not saying I'm granting you permission to do it. I'm saying it's a possible thing that could happen. So we use may in either sense. Sometimes for humorous effect, someone will say, may I use the restroom? And someone will be like, or like, can I use the restroom? And someone will be like, I don't know, can you? Like, are you able to do it? Clearly, that's a humorous misinterpretation of the force of the question as it was asked that time, referring to the term can, which is kind of like a synonym of may. So anyways, what did Harry Reid mean when he said, if you're out of work, you may beat up your wife? He was just talking to say that it becomes a larger statistical possibility. Like if you just examine tables in criminal justice statistics, you'll see that in the lower socioeconomic strata, there's a higher reported incidence of domestic violence episodes. That doesn't mean that one says it's okay to beat up your wife if you're out of work. They're just commenting that the likelihood of this happening sociologically is greater in that socioeconomic strata. So the misinterpretation of the news anchor was that he was saying it's fine and okay by me if poor people beat their wives. But obviously being charitable to the speaker, consistent with the most reasonable interpretation, you would think he meant it just in terms of possibility. So that's another case of equivocation. And let me just mention this last few. Sometimes when we use relative terms, we can commit this fallacy because we eliminate the context of what range we are discussing this relative term within. So for example, we say 2-year-old Katie is very tall. Her father, though, is not tall. He is average height. Does this mean that Katie is taller than her father? No, because we could be, again, equivocating on the meaning of what word here in this new example. Katie is very tall, 2-year-old. Her father is not very tall. So is she taller than him? Well, no. We would only think so if we didn't understand that there's relativity in the term tall. So tall in the first case means tall for a 2-year-old girl. And you can have a tall 2-year-old girl for a 2-year-old and a short man, a man that's not tall relative to average male adult height. But the word tall is not being used in the same sense throughout. And once again, we see that the misinterpretation would have followed from that assumption. So anyways, we don't want to commit that fallacy if we can't possibly avoid it. We also don't want to be tricked or misled by such fallacies. Sometimes when we buy products and we take in marketing materials and advertising information, we rely on one interpretation of the meaning of the product sales pitch, whereas there's others that are available as well. Sometimes it's in legal context, sometimes it's in a consumer context. Sometimes it has to do with contracts. You have to be very careful about the specified meaning of terms under a contract so that you know what you're actually agreeing to when you agree to the user agreement or sign on the dotted line, whatever the case is. So, a lot is at stake in just making sure we understand each other in the same way. So to avoid this fallacy, always clearly define any ambiguous words or phrases. Don't change or switch up the meaning of a term halfway through a discussion or an argument. And if you suspect that another person is using terms in a way that's ambiguous or unclear, then simply ask them for clarification. Like any of these different misunderstandings could have been simply eliminated if one person in the exchange said to the other, tell me more in specific detail what you mean when you use the word in this particular statement. And then we could disambiguate the ambiguity and not proceed with any misunderstanding. Okay, so that's an equivocation fallacy. So then with that, we go to the next. We got a few more to cover. So the next one in this list of fallacies of ambiguity is called Amphibole. All right, so I'm going to erase here. We'll go into the next, which is Amphibole. Okay. Okay, so Amphibole is the fallacy of grammatical ambiguity. So what this fallacy is all about is when there's basically a grammatical mistake in an argument which allows more than one conclusion to be drawn, and you just don't know which one. So that's the problem here. So again, when there is a grammatical mistake in an argument, which allows more than one conclusion to be drawn. Okay, fallacy of amphibole, the fallacy of a grammatical ambiguity or mistake. So yeah, that's it. That's the definition. When there's a grammatical mistake in an argument, which does allow more than one conclusion to be drawn. So sometimes the problem with the argument, the thing that makes it ambiguous, is the grammatical ambiguity rather than the ambiguity with respect to what a word's definition is. So let me give you some examples. One of them from the book that I'm looking at right here. Sometimes this fallacy is exposed in cases where there's a pronoun and we are not sure to whom or to what the pronoun refers. So let's think about this little written statement. It says here, Terry Schiavo's mother and her husband are on opposite sides of the battle over her life. Okay, there's something a little bit ambiguous here. The question is, what is the reference of which word? Let me read it again. By the way, what's the backstory? Terry Schiavo was a woman that was had a brain injury, and then she was placed into she fell into a coma, and they saw that her brain activity was basically dead, and that she was only being sustained through extraordinary life support systems. And so there was a disagreement between certain members of her family and her husband about whether she should be removed from the life support or not, because she didn't give an advance directive. And so people were left to try and make an inference about what her will would have been in case of this permanent vegetative coma. So it says here, Schiavo's mother and her husband disagree on the battle over her life. And so you're right, her husband. The female pronoun her could be referring to whose husband? It says Terry Schiavo's mother and her husband disagree. So whose husband could it refer to? It could, on the one hand, refer to her, meaning who? There's two possible references of the term her. So it says Terry Schiavo's mother and her husband are battling over her life. So her and her mother. So is it Schiavo's husband that's fighting with the mother of Schiavo? Or is it Schiavo's mother and the mother's husband, namely Schiavo's father? It's impossible to say without disambiguation of the reference of the pronoun her. In fact, as it says here, it was Schiavo's husband that wanted the feeding tube removed, but the mother and father of Schiavo that thought she could regain consciousness, insisting that the tube be kept in place. But we wouldn't know that really unless we inquired further into the underlying reference of the pronoun her. Okay, so that's one example. How about let's look at another case. Bill and Ted were hanging out and having a nice conversation about his girlfriend. So what's the ambiguity there? With respect to the word his, we don't know whether it refers to who or who. Bill and Ted talking about his girlfriend. It could be that his is a reference to the first male subject, Bill. It could be that his is a reference to the second named male subject, Ted. But we just cannot tell who it is unless we inquired further as to the reference of the pronoun. So those are all examples of amphibole. Sometimes this can be used for humorous effect. You see like kind of verbal sort of humor and stuff. So there's this film in the 90s, this kind of really zany satire film called Top Gun. And Spy Hard. Top Gun, we all know, is a real movie with Tom Cruise, but there's also a spoof of that. Anyway, Spy Hard. Spy Hard that has this little dialogue exchange in one scene. So the agent says this, "Sir, we've intercepted a very disturbing satellite transmission from our listening post on the Rock of Gibraltar." And the director asks, "What is it?" And the agent responds, "Oh yeah, well, it's this really big rock sticking out of the water over near the south coast of Spain." Now, this is a humorous example of amphibole because the question was asked, "What is it?" by the director to the agent. Now, when he asked, "What is it?" I guess if you think about it, the term "it" in the question is ambiguous, whether it refers to what? Sir, we've intercepted a disturbing satellite transmission from our listening post on the Rock of Gibraltar. What is it? And then he replies telling him what the Rock of Gibraltar is. So this question, what is it, could have been interpreted as asking what question? What is, namely what? The reference of it could have been the transmission itself, like what was the content of the transmission, or it could have been a reference to the other subject in the sentence, namely the location from which the transmission was intercepted. Now, obviously, the most common sense interpretation of the question was that it was a question about what the transmission was, but for they caused the sort of individual that's the other side of the conversation to interpret it as referring to what is the rock itself. Okay. Sometimes advertisers and marketers will use such ambiguity to try and drive the sale of a product. So they mentioned this in the textbook. Clinique had this fragrance called Happy, and in their marketing materials, they put this tagline up there: wear it and be happy. But the question could be asked, what is the function grammatically of the term and? Is it simply to express a conjunction of two unrelated facts? Like on the one hand, you'll wear it. On the other hand, and this has nothing to do with it, but also you'll be happy. They'll just, both things will happen. Or is it instead implying a relation of cause and effect? Wear it, that will be the cause. And what that will cause is this effect of you becoming happy. So wearing it leads to the happiness. Now, they probably hope that the consumer will take away the second interpretation, like I should buy this thing because I want to be happy and it'll make me happy. But if they bought it, put it on, and still were miserable, and tried to file suit or complain saying, what happened? You guys false advertised. You said wear it and be happy, but I'm wearing it and I'm still just as unhappy as ever. Then, of course, they could revert to the other interpretation, which is left ambiguous by the wording, and say, well, we just said wear it and be happy. I mean, one way you could look at it is it's going to cause it. Other possible way of looking at it is it's not related, but it'll just happen anyway. So you can't really pin us down on which interpretation we intended. So anyways, be wise to the fact that sometimes statements either in everyday speech, advertising, statements made in the media by public figures or whoever can sometimes commit these types of fallacies, including this second one, that's Amphibole. Okay. So far, so good, everybody. It seems like you guys are following me pretty well. So we're going to move to the third fallacy of ambiguity now. We've gone over so far equivocation, Amphibole. Now comes number 3, and that's the fallacy of accent. All right. Okay, fallacy of accent. See, that's clearly the letter E. So what's going on with this fallacy is that there's a key term or something in an argument, but it's emphasized. There's an accent or a stress placed on it, which changes the interpretation of the original argument. So this is a fallacy that happens when the meaning of an argument or statement changes based on which word or phrase in it is emphasized. When the meaning of an argument changes based on, and why does it change? Well, it changes based on what word or phrase in it is emphasized. Fallacy of accent. Okay, so I'm going to walk you guys through the explanation of this one as well. So then, notice this about language. Interesting thing about everyday human language, English and all others, is that by placing an accent or a stress, an emphasis on certain words in a statement, you can really transform the interpretation that one takes away from that statement simply by means of the emphasis used. Sometimes that's fine and well, but in other cases, it constitutes a fallacy because it misinterprets or distorts the original meaning of the given statement or argument. So, like, for example, take this sentence that I'm just going to say in like a flat monotone with no emphasis at all. Why did you steal my bike from me? That contains information, and I think you'd understand it if that statement was posed to you. But let me see how the significance of it changes when I start using certain inflection. Like if I asked it this way, why did you steal my bike from me? Now with the accent or emphasis placed on you, it kind of highlights that part of the statement, and it takes on the character of all people who would have stolen my bike from me, you, really, the one person that I would have never thought, why did you steal my bike from me, right? Or say it in another way. Why did you steal my bike from me? Now the emphasis is placed on the word bike, and it highlights that part of the question. So the force of it becomes, of all things you could have stolen, why my bike? You know, my cherished, prized possession of a bike. Why did you steal my bike from me? Like, I know you're a thief, and I know you steal from all kinds of people, but me? I mean, why would you have stolen it from me? So accent on you highlights how you among all people. Accent on bike highlights how of all things that you could have stolen. Accent on me highlights why me be the victim. Why did you steal my bike from me? Like, couldn't you have borrowed it? Or you know, did you really have to steal it? Now the highlight is on why of all things involving my bike did you choose to steal it as opposed to borrow it or, you know, ask me or something else. So, okay, is that clear? I'm just giving you guys examples of how the way that a term or phrase in a given argument or a piece of speech has an inflection, a stress, an emphasis, or as they put it, accent placed on it, that can sometimes transform the underlying meaning. But in some cases, it misstates the originally intended meaning. So here's an example from the book. Imagine this situation playing out. So mother comes home to the daughter, and she's upset at the daughter because what she sees when she gets home is that the daughter has burned down like the garage unit for the home. And so she goes to the daughter, and she's very upset about that. And she says, why did you do that? Come on. I mean, didn't I say don't play with matches? Didn't I say that? Don't play with matches. And now the daughter replies in this way. Oh, yeah, I know that. That's the thing. I mean, because I wasn't playing with the matches, and I'm just setting fire to things. This is a deliberate act. This is arson. This is no game to me. So, you know, you told me don't play with matches. Well, I'm not playing. Now, look, what word was the daughter accenting in order to gain a more narrow interpretation of the mother's rule? Obviously, it's the word, which one? Playing, that's right. I mean, so look, when the mother said originally back in the original outset, I don't play with matches, what do you think was intended? What would be the common sense interpretation of that statement? Don't play with matches means what with matches? Don't what with them? Like, what should have been the correct interpretation that the daughter should have had when told don't play with matches? In other words, we're saying don't what? Don't use matches. Don't touch them. Don't even, you know, don't light those matches. Don't get anywhere near them. Don't do anything with matches, right? But the daughter, by stressing the word playing, is trying to interpret it as though the rule was simply you can use matches as long as you don't create games and little amusing, you know, activities out of them. So obviously that would be a failure of communication, which is caused by the use of the accent in the child's speech. Okay, so here's another example used in the book. Suppose that the college says we're going to have new policies to crack down on off-campus drinking. So here's the student that hears this, and the response is this. According to the school newspaper, the administration is going to crack down on off-campus drinking. Awesome. I'm glad to hear that they're okay with me drinking on campus. On campus. So you see, by placing accent on the word off, it's like the student thinks all they're telling me is as long as I drink, you know, as long as if I'm drinking off campus, that's what they want to prohibit. But on campus, you know, green light. Obviously, that's not what's intended, though, by the school policy. It's not like they're saying off-campus drinking is the problem and on-campus drinking is just fine. They mean that, you know, consistent with their already established rules against drinking on campus, they want to add some further rules and restrictions to doing so off campus, maybe at school events or whatever. So the misinterpretation elicited by the hearer of the rule was because of the misplaced accent on the word all off campus. Now, some of these seem silly enough, you know, and like not a big deal, but in other cases, there can actually be much more at stake. Returning to the earlier example of Shannon Townsend that got recruited into this cult, the Brethren and other cult groups sometimes try to manipulate people to their ranks by utilizing their already existing and established religious beliefs. And so they'll point out parts of scripture out of context by doing what is called proof texting. They will cite a passage of scripture and with a misplaced accent try to cause a naive person to think that this is a hidden message which is supportive of their cult and its ideology. So like, for example, trying to get people to join the Brethren and forsake all their friends and to abandon all their commitments and family members, etc. They made this appeal to them. They say, well, look, you're already a Christian, right? So let me refer you to Luke 14:33. And the Bible there says, so likewise, whosoever of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. Well, look, it says right there, whosoever of you that forsaketh not all that he hath. All that he hath. I mean, what do you think it means? Now I've accented all that he hath, and I'm trying to interpret it to the recruit that this means you're supposed to cut off everybody and just join our cult and not associate with any of your previous social connections. Another case, they could say, well, look, you don't want to join the Brethren? I think you should just look back at the Bible. You say you believe in it, and it says right there, be your brother's keeper. Brother's keeper, we're the Brethren. So, I mean, obviously it was talking about us all along. So as much as it may seem like, innocent and the subject matter for jokes and so on, sometimes people really can be manipulated by being drawn towards a piece of writing out of context through the usage of an accent or a stress. So be very careful. Sometimes people don't understand the force of contractual agreements they make with other people, personal agreements that they make with other people, the understanding that they take away from statements that people exchange in everyday speech, life, emails, and so forth. So if you're unsure about which term is being emphasized in an argument, just ask the person that made the argument to repeat it or to explain it in a different way. If you think an argument has been taken out of context, then don't merely accept it on the basis of the other person's report, but go and double check with your own judgment to see whether or not that fits in with common sense interpretation of the original source. And James, you ask, what sort of question will we be asked relating to this fallacy on a quiz or test? Basically, the way that the quiz and test will go regarding fallacies is I'll give you guys samples of fallacious arguments, and your job will simply be to return back to me which fallacy was seen in that example. And in another case, there's going to be a future homework assignment where you're going to go into advertising and marketing materials, and you're going to try and find examples of the fallacies in the advertisements. So you're going to have to be able to both identify examples based on the type of fallacy, and you're also going to have to identify the type of fallacy based on a written example. So like if I told you equivocation, and I say on a test, give me an example of that, then you have to be able to write out an example of an equivocation fallacy. And if I give you an example and I say what fallacy is in this argument, then you have to just know the name of it. So those are the two skills, recognition and also the creation of original examples. But since it's all online, you'll have a good margin of error to find the correct information when those assignments are given out. Okay, so that's fallacy of accent, everybody. And we just have two more. The last two for today are fallacy of division and fallacy of composition. And although there are two of them, they're actually kind of like two for one. They're very similar in the underlying logic of each one. So by knowing about one, it'll go a long ways towards knowing about the other one and vice versa. So next one anyway is fallacy of division, division fallacy. Okay, so the fallacy of division. This is a fallacy that occurs when a characteristic of an entire group is erroneously assumed to be a characteristic of each member of the group. In other words, one assumes that since a group has a feature, that every single individual part of the group does too, and that's not always true. So let me give you that definition. A characteristic of an entire group is erroneously, meaning in error, sorry, little misspelling here, erroneously assumed to be a characteristic of each member of that group. Okay, so that's the definition. It's any example of an argument where a feature of a whole group is identified, but then one makes the illegitimate inference that every single member of the collective group has got that same feature that the group as a whole does, and that's not always true. Now, the form of the division fallacy can be written out precisely. Here's the form that the division fallacy takes. So it starts off with a claim about a group. For example, that group G, some group, has a certain feature or characteristic. Let's say characteristic C, just for generality. First premise here says group G has characteristic C. Now suppose that there's one individual, X, who is a member of group G. So the faulty conclusion that one derives in this example of division fallacy is that the individual X also has the characteristic C of the whole group. So conclusion, therefore, X has characteristic C. All right? So think about it like this. Let's see what's a good example of that. The United States is the wealthiest country in the world. Okay? You are a citizen of the United States, so you're a member of that group. Therefore, you are the wealthiest person in the world. But does that really follow? No. So even though the group as a whole has this amazing wealth and power, it does not mean that every individual member of the group does as well. That would be the division fallacy, one example of it. It's called division because the direction of the argument goes from whole to part. So the conclusion is a conclusion about each part of the whole. And the problem is when someone says that if the whole thing has a feature, then every single part of it does, and that's just not so. For example, another case. This Professor Vulich that I am, I can talk to you, and I am doing so right now. So Vulich has this feature, he can talk. Now take an individual cell swabbed from like the inside of my cheek. That's a member of the thing that I am. It's one cell of my body, so it's one part of me. Can the individual cell talk? No. So the whole is greater than the sum of the parts in this case. All the little cells combined, billions of them, whatever, combines to create this living organism that's talking to you right now live. But not each single part of that collective has the same ability to do that. So in this case, the whole has a feature that is not distributed among each single part of it. I've got plenty of examples. So say the hotel is very large. Room 101 is one room of the hotel. Does it follow that room 101 is large? No, because you can have, obviously, a large hotel, the whole thing that's large, but it's built of many, many small, tiny little rooms. There's lots of hotels like that, actually. So in all the cases that I'm mentioning, a person has drawn an erroneous inference from a characteristic of a whole group to each individual member of it, you know? I am visible to the naked eye. You don't need a microscope to see me. There's, let's say, a blood cell in my body. That's a part of me. but it doesn't follow that that blood cell is visible to the naked eye. It's a part of a larger collective that is, but each part is not. How about this? This is from the book, funny example maybe. The group G, men. Men are taller than women. That's just on average true. Okay. Second premise, Danny DeVito, a Hollywood actor, is a man. Does it follow that he's taller than the average woman? No. I don't know if everyone knows the reference. It's been mentioned in the book here, but Danny DeVito is kind of short. He's 4'11", I think. He's the actor that acts and plays the owner of the bar in Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's like sitcom that's been around for a long time. Anyway, knowing about his height, we all can understand he's one man that's not taller than the average woman, even though the group that he's a part of does have that feature overall. You know, the football team has great defense. Let's say Tom Brady is a member of a football team. Does it follow that Tom Brady has great defense? Well, no. I mean, he's a quarterback, right? So he's a part of maybe a collective that has a feature if you look at it as a whole. But not every single member of the group has the same feature, you know? So there examples abound. Sometimes people rely on this type of fallacy when they engage in stereotyping, you know, like so they judge an individual based on the membership they are in a group, and sometimes that's not good, of course. I don't want to repeat any harmful or negative stereotypes because that's just not right, but there's one that's I guess a positive stereotype in the book, so that's a fine example. They say, for example, Canadians are really nice people. So there is this kind of cultural stereotype of the Canadians that they're very friendly, helpful to strangers, and so on. So say that's the cultural reputation of those that are Canadians. Continues to say Derek is from Canada, so therefore Derek is nice. I mean, look, just because one person's a member of a larger cultural group does not necessarily mean they have all features that are commonly associated with the group as a whole. So different examples I'm giving you guys. Hopefully that makes enough sense. If so, let's just quickly get in the other one, and that's the composition fallacy. Composition is just like the flip side of division in going in the opposite direction. So starting from an individual member of a group and drawing an erroneous conclusion that the whole group they're a part of has the same quality that they exhibit. So let me erase this, and we'll go over that quickly. Composition. And that's the last one for today's meeting. Okay, so the last fallacy of ambiguity here is the composition fallacy. And this fallacy is when a characteristic of a member of a group is erroneously assumed to be a characteristic of the entire group. Okay, so is erroneously assumed to be a characteristic of the whole group. That's composition. It is the opposite of division, basically, Dominic, yes. Let me give you the form that it takes, and it's easy to anticipate what it's going to look like based on what we just went over. The first premise of the composition argument would be that X, some individual, is a member of a given group. Let's call it group G. Okay, second premise, X has a certain characteristic C. So therefore, the fallacious conclusion in this example is that the group G has the same characteristic that X does. All right, so that would be composition right there. And that's also problematic. So for example, an individual cell in my body cannot be seen without a microscope. So therefore, I cannot be seen without a microscope. Clearly, that's not the case. The thing that is formed out of the myriad number of parts is a macroscopic object, even though the individual parts are microscopic. So even though one microscopic part can't be seen without magnification, the whole thing that they form together can be. Room 101 is a room of the hotel. Room 101 is small. It does not follow that the hotel itself as a whole is small. So sometimes qualities, attributes, characteristics that are seen in individual elements of something are not seen in the whole thing that they're a part of. Let's see. Here's an example from the book as well. So sodium and chloride are both very dangerous elements. Therefore, the combination of them, sodium chloride, is very dangerous. But that's not true. If you know a little bit about your chemistry, or even if you don't, you might know that sodium chloride is just the scientific name for table salt. That's NaCl. And table salt is, of course, not dangerous or unstable. It's a staple of everyone's diet. But the individual elements, when they're not combined in that molecular composition of NaCl, they're highly unstable and quite dangerous. The sodium by itself, chloride by itself, isn't so good. Sodium chloride, the two things fused into one, creates a staple of everyone's diet. So yet again, we see an example where although the parts of the whole are dangerous, the whole that they form in combination is not. So let's see. You could say of a person, like, okay, LeBron James is a member of the Lakers. LeBron James plays, small forward. Is that his position? I guess he kind of, point guard actually now. So he's kind of everywhere. Maybe I'm using the wrong example with LeBron because he's so versatile. Who's someone that's definitely, okay. Chris Paul is a member of the Oklahoma City Thunder. Chris Paul is a point guard. He's like a tried and true point guard. Like, he definitely fits that position. You couldn't say he plays anything else. So anyway, does that mean that the entire Oklahoma City Thunder are point guards? Clearly not. So, examples abound, but these are just examples of the composition fallacy. And it's called composition for a reason parallel to why the other one is called division. Because in the division fallacy, you start with the claim about a whole group and you divide down to the parts. So it starts from the whole and it goes to each part. With composition, the initial claims are about the parts and the conclusion that is derived is about the whole. So you can imagine stereotyping happening when a person had limited experience with certain members of groups and then judge the whole group based on them, or vice versa, someone being associated with qualities seen in a group at large, which they themselves don't have as individuals. I don't know, let's say it's a very tall woman. I don't know if you guys know tennis. Maria Sharapova is 6'3". Sharapova is a woman. She's taller than your average man. So does it mean that women are taller than men on average? No, just one atypical case. All right, so with that, I'm telling you guys that we've covered the material I wanted us to go over today, but let me not leave you too quickly because I want to just at least mention briefly what the homework assignment will be due next Thursday. And I'm going to back this up with a Canvas announcement to you that I'll send in the next hour or so. But just so that we can discuss it one time live while we're all right here. This is the homework assignment I'm going to write on the board, which is due not Tuesday, but next Thursday. Homework number 2, due Thursday, April 9th. You're just going to email it to me before the class time, 12:35 p.m. on Thursday the 9th. And it's basically this. It's exercise 5- Okay, then the 5-3 is pretty much what I'm sure it is. Yeah, 5-3, part 1. That's page 151, leading on and continuing into 152. There are lettered exercises that run through the whole alphabet A through Z. So that's 26 examples, A, B, C, D, blah, 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 the whole alphabet. What you have to basically do to complete that homework is easy enough. You just have to go through the examples, 26 here written, and then you have to just tell me which fallacy of relevance occurs in each of the written examples. The fallacies of relevance we have not discussed yet. They're going to be discussed on Tuesday. So some of you may want to delay the starting of the homework until after that lecture, but feel free if you want to read ahead, gain a sense of what the fallacies of relevance are, and attempt some of the homework problems if you like. Can you make it an assignment on Canvas? Well, yes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute the instructions to you via Canvas. And you'll see a reminder there if you just check in with your class announcements. I've been trying to keep tabs on you guys and send announcements regularly through Canvas. So I would just ask that everybody be up on their Canvas notifications. They arrive to you, I believe, as emails or in the Canvas announcement system for the class. You're going to send me back your submission in an attachment or in the body of your emails no later than Thursday the 9th at 12:35. And Canvas is the way that I will notify you guys exactly of the announcements. So this is just me doing it one time in the live stream, but definitely it's going to be announced on Canvas too. So it's A through Z. It involves fallacies of relevance, which is the topic of discussion on Tuesday. So don't misunderstand that. These fallacies that are used in this example set are the ones that are yet to be revealed to you on Tuesday, but you're free to read ahead because that's the lecture topic on Tuesday of next week. I'll provide detailed instructions in the Canvas notification, but I'm just telling you now in person. Well, there's ambiguity, there's relevance, and then there is unwarranted assumption. The third category is what we will deal with next Thursday. And then the quiz that spans over all three categories is what follows on the following Tuesday. In each case where there's something new that is due for you to me, you're going to have your grades given back to you prior to that. So over the weekend, I will be finished with the midterm grading, and I will notify you via Canvas that you can inquire for your grades starting next week, no later than Tuesday. Then you'll have your grades for everything up through the midterm, and you'll know exactly where you stand as you submit this second homework to me next Thursday. So there are 8 fallacies of relevance. That means the answer for each question A through Z is one of those 8 fallacies. Now, there are a couple of examples in the problem set where there is no fallacy at all. I don't want you to be too confused because I'm telling you there's only a few like that. Most of them all have fallacies, but there's like a couple where the argument actually does not have a logical error or flaw. And if you had one of those examples, then the written answer you would give would just be none or not applicable for that particular example. Okay? So I think that's all the information that I had for you guys today. Let me know if you have other questions for now or anything I can help you with while we're present here at the live stream. If you feel good and you think that this is all clear enough, then we're pretty much good to go. I would ask if you have any other friends or classmates in the class that you know of that didn't gain an understanding of how to tune into these live streams, make sure that they know. But we had pretty good attendance today. I think it was up around 25, and on most class days, that's very similar to the attendance in the real meeting. So you guys are doing great. I really appreciate that. I know it's a big change for all of us, but we're just doing our best, and I hope and believe that this is simply going to be a one-semester deal, and we'll all be back to our familiar face-to-face meetings on campus in the fall. But for now, anyways, we're online. So really, I guess that's about it. I guess for now, anyways, then, look for my message about the homework 2 that's not due until next Thursday. I'll send it out this afternoon after I'm done here. Other than that, have a great weekend. Stay safe, everybody. Stay healthy. And I'm glad to see you guys are here at the meeting. Take care, all right? And, comment, subscribe, and continue to follow through the rest of the semester. Now you have a taste of how it will be. It's just going to be like this. It's much similar to a real in-person meeting, I guess, except we're all in our different, homes and rooms and so on. But thanks again, everybody. Take care. Have a great weekend, and I'll be in touch with you. All right? Bye-bye.